Hashtag a poor single dad saved a billionaire mid-flight, then disappeared without a word. The moment James Parker's weathered hands pressed against Richard Keller's chest, performing CPR at 35,000 feet, neither man knew their lives would forever be intertwined. One would spend millions searching for the other, while one would slip back into anonymity, unaware of the fortune waiting to find him. If you're moved by stories of everyday heroes and second chances, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories that remind us of our shared humanity. Flight 2187 from Chicago to San Francisco was mostly unremarkable that Tuesday afternoon. The usual mix of business travelers tapping away on laptops, tourists excitedly planning their Golden Gate Bridge photos, and flight attendants navigating narrow aisles with practiced efficiency. In seat 32C sat James Parker, a 42-year-old electrician and single father of two, who had scraped together enough money for this trip only because his sister's wedding demanded his presence. His calloused hands fidgeted with the fraying cuff of his only decent shirt as he mentally calculated how many extra shifts he'd need to make up for the lost weekend wages. 23 rows ahead in first class, Richard Keller reclined in 9A, absent-mindedly swirling a glass of scotch while reviewing quarterly projections on his tablet. At 58, the tech billionaire had built Keller Innovations from his garage into a Fortune 500 company. The Wall Street Journal had recently profiled him as the billionaire who never sleeps, noting his legendary work ethic and ruthless business acumen. Neither man had any reason to notice the other's existence. Until Richard suddenly clutched his chest and collapsed in the aisle. The flight attendant's voice cracked as she made the announcement, "If there's a doctor on board, please press your call button immediately." James Parker wasn't a doctor. He was just a man who'd taken first aid courses when his wife died 3 years ago, leaving him alone with their children. "If anything happens to you too, what would they do?" his sister had asked, and that was enough to send him to Red Cross classes every Tuesday night for 6 months. When no call buttons lit up, James unbuckled his seatbelt. "Sir, please remain seated," the flight attendant said as James approached. "I'm certified in CPR and first aid," he said quietly. "Let me help." The next 4 minutes were a blur of compression counts, sweat beading on James's forehead, and the silent prayers of 178 passengers. When Richard Keller gasped and his eyes fluttered open, the cabin erupted in applause. "You saved my life," Richard whispered, still disoriented. James simply nodded, helped the flight attendants move Richard to a more comfortable position, and returned to his seat without fanfare. When they landed in San Francisco, emergency medical personnel rushed aboard to take Richard to the hospital. In the commotion, James slipped away to catch his sister's rehearsal dinner. He never gave his name. 3 days later, James was back at work, climbing electrical poles in Milwaukee's industrial district, the incident already fading from his mind. His children, Emma, 12, and Noah, 9, needed new school clothes, and the rent was due next week. Heroes don't have time to dwell on past deeds when reality demands attention. Meanwhile, Richard Keller was being discharged from Stanford Medical Center with a diagnosis of a severe arrhythmia and a new lease on life. The doctors had been clear: without immediate CPR, he would have died on that plane. "I need to find him," Richard told his assistant, Vanessa. "The man who saved me." "We've contacted the airline," Vanessa replied, scrolling through her tablet. "They're citing privacy regulations. All they'll say is that it was a passenger in economy who volunteered." Richard frowned. For a man accustomed to getting what he wanted through money or influence, this anonymity was frustrating. "Put our best people on it. Check social media, news reports, anything. Someone must know something." But James Parker wasn't on social media. He didn't tweet about saving lives or post dramatic airplane rescue stories on Instagram. He had simply done what needed doing, then disappeared back into the fabric of ordinary America. 2 months passed. Richard had returned to work with a new perspective. Near-death experiences have a way of clarifying priorities, and he found himself increasingly distracted by thoughts of the stranger who had given him this second chance. "Sir," Vanessa said one morning, entering his office with unusual excitement. "We may have found him." She placed a printout on his desk, a wedding photo from a small Milwaukee newspaper. In the background, barely visible among the guests, was a man Richard instantly recognized. "James Parker," Vanessa said. "Electrician, widower, 2 children. Lives in a rental apartment in Milwaukee's South Side." Richard stared at the grainy image. "Book my jet. We're going to Milwaukee." James was replacing a circuit breaker in an aging apartment building when his phone rang. It was Emma's school. "Mr. Parker, Emma's had an asthma attack. We've called an ambulance." The world tilted. James abandoned his tools and ran. At Children's Hospital, a doctor explained that Emma needed specialized treatment. Her asthma had developed complications, treatable, but expensive. Insurance would cover some, but not all. The numbers they mentioned made James's stomach sink. That night, after Emma had fallen asleep in her hospital bed, James sat in the hallway with his head in his hands. Noah was staying with a neighbor, the hospital parking fees were adding up, and work was calling about the abandoned job site. The walls were closing in. "Mr. Parker?" James looked up to see a tall man in an expensive suit. Something about him seemed vaguely familiar. "My name is Richard Keller. You saved my life on a flight 2 months ago." James blinked in confusion. "How did you find me?" "That's a long story," Richard said, sitting beside him. "But I've been looking for you since that day." "Why?" Richard studied the man beside him, exhausted, worried, clearly struggling. Yet this was the same man who had stepped forward without hesitation when needed. "Because you disappeared before I could thank you. And because I believe things happen for a reason." The next morning, Emma's doctor arrived with news. "We've been approved for the specialized treatment program. It's fully covered." "There must be some mistake," James said. "My insurance wouldn't." "It's not insurance," the doctor explained. "The hospital received an anonymous donation specifically for Emma's treatment." James immediately knew. When he returned to Emma's room, he found a business card on the side table with a handwritten note: "Some debts can never be repaid, but I'd like to try. Call me. RK." 6 months later, James Parker still worked as an electrician, but now he owned his own small business. The Keller Foundation had created a scholarship fund for first responders and their families, with James as its first recipient. Emma was healthy, Noah was thriving, and their new apartment had enough bedrooms for everyone. Richard Keller had undergone changes too. His company now offered comprehensive first aid training to all employees and had donated automated external defibrillators to airports and schools across the country. The board had initially questioned these distractions, until Richard explained that his priorities had changed the moment a stranger had chosen to help him without expectation of reward. On the anniversary of the flight, Richard invited James and his children to dinner. "I've been thinking," Richard said as they finished dessert, "about what makes someone step forward when others stay seated." James shrugged. "I just did what anyone would do." "But that's just it," Richard replied. "Not anyone would do it. Most people didn't. You did." Emma looked up at her father with pride. "Dad always says we have to help when we can because someday we might be the ones needing help." Richard nodded thoughtfully. "Your father is a wise man." Later, as they walked to their cars, Richard asked the question that had been bothering him for a year. "Why did you leave without giving your name? You must have known I would have rewarded you." James was quiet for a moment. "I didn't do it for a reward. And honestly, I was going to be late for my sister's rehearsal dinner." He smiled. "Some things are just that simple." Richard laughed, a genuine laugh that felt new in his chest. "Nothing about you is simple, James Parker. You're the most complicated man I've ever met, precisely because you think you're ordinary." "Maybe that's the point," James replied. Maybe we're all extraordinary in ordinary moments. As their friendship grew over the years, both men found themselves changed by that chance encounter at 35,000 feet. Richard learned that wealth meant nothing without purpose, while James discovered that accepting help didn't diminish his strength but multiplied it. The Keller-Parker First Responder Initiative eventually trained thousands of people in CPR and emergency response. Somewhere, on flights and in shopping malls and office buildings across America, lives were being saved by people who stepped forward when needed, then disappeared without seeking recognition. Because sometimes, the most powerful acts are the ones performed without audience or applause, just one human being recognizing another's need and responding with nothing but their own two hands and the conviction that we are all, in our most vulnerable moments, worthy of being saved. And if you find yourself wondering whether small actions matter in this vast world, remember the billionaire and the electrician whose lives collided for 4 minutes on a Tuesday afternoon flight, and how those 4 minutes rippled outward to touch countless others. Sometimes the most extraordinary stories are the ones that begin with someone simply doing what needed to be done, then returning to their seat without a word.